Alright, in this video I'm going to show you how you can get this particle-like effect in MO2, and this uses an instancer and a modifier, and we can apply this to pretty much any object we want. I also wanted to use this video to announce that I have a fluid pack available. It is 30 object files that resemble somewhat of a fluid effect. Head on over to my website www.bcraftmath.com, and inside of the store click on this fluid pack right here, and you can pick up this fluid pack, and for now until the end of July you can actually get 25% off. Just use the word motion as a discount code. MOTION, no capital letters. Now once you purchase this pack, you'll get 30 object files, and I'll be adding even more in the future, and you'll receive an email update, and you can get those additional objects at no additional charge. One-time purchase. These objects import nicely into Cinema 4D, MO2, Maya, etc. And let's check out this PDF here to see the 30 objects that are available right now. So this will be here for your reference. You can see all 30 objects, and we're going to actually use one of these in this tutorial. Down at the end of the PDF, you can see some samples that I've rendered in MO2. Just one of these was rendered in Cinema 4D, and I'll leave it up to you to figure out which one that was. But what I want to do in this tutorial is I want to create this effect right here, and we're actually going to use this exact same object. So once you purchase the fluid pack, it'll come in a zip file, and you can unzip it, and once you do that, you should have all 30 objects as well as that PDF document for reference. This Pack 112 object, this one right here, is the one I'm going to be using in this tutorial. Now I have MO2 loaded up, and I have the wrench icon checked because when we start adding these spheres, these particles to this object, playback time can slow down, and it would be a good idea to do a RAM preview just to view the scene. So let's go ahead and add that object from the zip file. Let's go to Add, Model, from Library. I'm going to create a new category up here. Going to call it tutorial. Inside of that new category, I'm going to import an object, and the one that we want to use is the Pack 112. There's that same object I showed you a moment ago. Let's go ahead and choose that. Give it a second to load up. Let's go ahead and rename this. I'm going to uncheck import materials because we'll be adding our own inside of here. And there's that object. Let's go ahead and add that to the scene. I'm going to take my camera, reset it, and I'm going to drag out on the Z. I'm going to come to my splash sample here, and I'm going to rotate it on the Y so that we can get a different view of the object. And I'm going to come in a little bit closer so you can see this object. It has a lot of vertices on it, and let me go ahead and talk about vertices with you. If I go back to that object inside of my library, this splash sample, if you look right here, you probably can't even see that, but it has over 300,000 vertices. And if I'm understanding this instancer correctly, technically it's going to create over 300,000 tiny little spheres that we'll use to create this object. But before we make those particles on this object, let me show you how you can apply a quick material to get a splash-like effect. So I'm applying a material, transparent, clean water. Now it kind of looks like a splash. Let's go ahead and add a light. And I'm going to take that light and drag it back on the Z and maybe move it over to the right some. And moving this around in the background like this, both on the X and the Z, heck, it probably wouldn't even hurt to do the Y, but you can get those shimmering effects from that liquid. But that's not what this tutorial is about. But I thought it'd be cool to show it to you. Something else I'm going to do real quick before we dive into the particle tutorial, I'm going to go to that material. I'm going to pick a different one. I'm going to go to Basic Surfaces. I'm going to come down here to this Basic Surface, what is that, 18? I'm going to apply that. Click OK, and it doesn't look right. All we have to do is change the texture mapping to cubic. And now you have that texture on this object. Now, we technically don't need to see this object, so I'm going to go ahead and hide it, and let's add an instancer. And for this instancer, we want to use an object. Inside of the instancer settings, let's drag that object into this little piece right here. Nothing's changed. Now what we want to do is we want to add a sphere to our scene. We want this sphere to be very, very, very small. Two ways we can adjust this, either the radius or the scale. I'm going to take the radius and bump it on down to say 0.01, and that's a tiny sphere. I actually want it to be a little bit smaller, so we can come in here and adjust the scale as well. I'm going to take it to half of that. So we have a very small sphere here. Barely see it. That's going to be our particle. Now what I also want to do with this sphere is I want to give it a texture with some illumination. Now it won't cast shadows, I don't think, but we can at least give it that light effect. So right clicking on the sphere, apply material, and I'm just going to do a new material. And I'm okay with the default settings, except down here where we have illuminance, let's crank it on up. And I tell you what, just so that we can see that it is actually working, let me bump this radius on back up a little bit. So now that you can see this sphere does have some illuminance to it. I'm going to bump that down to 0.01. Tiny sphere. Let's drag that sphere into the instancer. Now this is where playback will be slow. Because technically what just happened here is it generated over 300,000 of those tiny spheres, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, it puts a particle or this sphere on every single one of those vertices of that object. I'm going to take my camera and I'm going to back it on out a little bit. Now loading this will become slow, but I want you to understand there are a bunch of tiny spheres that make this object. For now, let's disable this instancer just for a minute. That's going to make our playback much faster for right now. What we want to do here with this instancer is all those particles that are making that object, we want to move them around. So let's add a modifier. So when we go to add an instancer, let's come down here to modifier and let's select random. Now when we do this, it's giving us a sphere, and anything inside of this sphere, take note of these little tiny particles over here. Of course those are spheres too, but I'm going to call them particles. So I'm going to go ahead and rename that particle. So all of these little particles that sit inside of this instancer, they're going to be affected by this modifier that we have here. Anything that's not inside of that modifier sphere that we have here will not be affected. Well, let's go to the modifier settings. I don't want to change the scale of my particles, so I'm just going to come down here and set the global scale to 0. But we do want to affect the position, and the position X, Y, and Z. So let's go ahead and set these to something crazy like 20 each. Now, I still have the instancer disabled because, again, the playback will be very slow until we do a RAM preview. But let me go ahead and re-enable this real quick. It may take a second to load. So now that this is loaded up, you can see all these particles have like exploded out from that object. But what we want to do is we actually want to take these particles and bring them down to create that object. Now you may see this thing flashing in and out. Take note, remember, we have over 300,000 particles here on the screen, or maybe some of them are off the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and disable this instancer to speed up playback. So again, all those particles that you just saw, we want to shrink this modifier down to technically where the modifier is nothing, it becomes 0. And a way to do that is we can come down here to our modifier settings and we can keyframe this global range here. Notice if I just start tapping down, notice that modifier sphere is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So let me put that global range on 0.5, basically half the size of what it was, and I'm going to re-enable this instancer and we're going to see if we can see some particles that have built onto the object versus some that are still coming to form that object. So I'm going to re-enable this instancer. It may take a second, and this is perfect. So right here you can see that we still have some particles that are not on the object, but they're coming to it. But you can definitely see the object being formed now, and the reason why you can see that is because the particles that are on the object now, those are outside of this modifier sphere. And if we shrink this modifier sphere down to 0, all of these particles will form onto this object. So let's disable the instancer, and I'm going to come down to my modifier settings. I'm going to crank that back up to 1, and by it being a size of 1, the object, the entire object does sit inside of this sphere because the sphere is in the center of our scene and the object is in the center of our scene. So you have to make sure your object is inside of this modifier sphere to apply those settings. So for the global range, I'm keyframing at the first frame of my project. Global range size is 1. I'm going to fast forward to 120, the end of my project, or 119, and I'm going to set that down to 0. So playing this back, you can see that modifier sphere is shrinking. Now what we want to do is let's re-enable some of our settings so we can really see the full effect we have. Before I do that, I'm going to go to my background and I'm just going to make it solid black. Totally optional there. I'm going to click on the diamond. This is going to give us those nice camera effects. And for my camera, I'm just going to set it to default. That's going to give us some of the bloom and all that good stuff, maybe a little dirty lens, whatnot. And let's re-enable this instancer. Now I'm at frame 24, so we're going to see some particles on the object and some particles off of the object. So as you can see, it's way bright right now. So we could dial down that illuminance some, I'm sure, on the sphere. And again, if you have that instancer enabled right now, it is going to be slow, or at least it is on my computer. I'm going to come down to that illuminance, and I'm going to bump it down to maybe 5. And I'll be quite honest with you too, probably in the modifier, we can adjust the X, Y, and Z position even more. So let's do that. So for that modifier, let's come on down. Let's take the X, Y, and Z, and let's bump them up to 50. But check that out. You know, we have the diamond enabled, our instancer is showing, and by us moving these positions up higher, we do see some spread, and we see that motion blur we have from our camera settings. So I'll tell you what, you got 2 options here. You can go ahead and generate a RAM preview. I'm going to see how long this will take. It probably will take a while. So we're looking at a little under 20 minutes, I'm guessing. But by us letting it do this, okay, now it's jumped down to 10 minutes. So that's not too bad. But once we do this RAM preview, we can preview this in the viewport, and it'll be almost at full speed. So I'll be back in a minute. So with that RAM preview done, we can scrub the playhead now, and it's still way bright, so we can definitely bump down the illuminance. But this is the effect we have here. So I'm going to head on over to that material for the particle, and I'm going to bump that illuminance down, maybe down to 1, I guess. Let's see what 1 looks like. So that adjustment, it does look pretty good now, and I think I'm ready to render. So there's a lot of settings you can adjust, obviously, with the illuminance and the size and animating the camera and whatnot. But I wanted to show you one way you can get this effect, and also, again, the fluid pack that I have available over at my website. Don't forget to use MoTION, no caps. That's motion for a discount code, 25% off. And that will include the 30 object files that you see here, as well as any future updates. I plan on adding at least 30 more sometime in the near future. And if you purchase this, feel free to request a certain look. Leave a comment below if you want a certain fluid effect that looks like something. I'll try my best to get that done for you. And there you have it, a particle effect in mO2 using an object, an instancer, and a modifier. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. And that's it for this video. I hope it helped.